Michel's body had become a cork in a bottle made of ancient limestone. What had started as a tight squeeze through the clamp had transformed into an inescapable vice, where every attempt to free himself only wedged him deeper into the rock that had been carved by water over millions of years. The morning air carried a chill that penetrated even the thickest jacket as Michel stepped outside his apartment on April 7th, 2008. At 30, he possessed the lean build and weathered hands of someone who had spent countless hours gripping rock faces across Poland's mountainous regions. Today felt different, though, charged with anticipation for an adventure that would take him not up toward the sky, but deep into the Earth's hidden chambers. For years, Michel had found solace in the vertical world of mountaineering. Granite and limestone had been his teachers, showing him how to read the subtle language of cracks and holds, how to balance risk with reward, and how to push his body beyond what most people considered possible. But recently, a new obsession had taken root in his mind, the mysterious world that existed beneath his feet. The transition hadn't happened overnight. It began with a documentary about cave systems in France, progressed through online forums dedicated to spelunking, and eventually consumed his free time entirely. His small apartment had transformed into a research center filled with geological surveys, cave maps, and equipment catalogs. Michel approached this new passion with the same intensity that had made him a capable climber, devouring every available piece of information about underground exploration. What he lacked, however, was something no amount of reading could provide: actual experience in the underground world. Saspowska National Park had captured Michel's imagination like no other destination. Located a mere 10 miles north of Krakow, the park concealed a labyrinth of limestone caves beneath its protected forests. His research had revealed an intricate network of 220 documented cave systems, each carved by millennia of patient water flow through the region's calcium-rich bedrock. The descriptions he'd read painted vivid pictures: chambers large enough to hold cathedrals, decorated with flowstone formations that resembled frozen waterfalls, narrow passages that tested human flexibility, underground streams that had carved beauty from solid stone over millions of years. 10 major caves within the park boundaries have been mapped and studied, each offering unique challenges and rewards. There was just one problem that made these caves irresistible to Michel: they were completely off-limits to the public. The restriction wasn't arbitrary bureaucracy. Years of systematic looting by fossil thieves and artifact hunters had damaged irreplaceable formations and left dangerous conditions throughout the cave systems. Park authorities had reluctantly installed metal barriers across cave entrances, transforming these natural wonders into forbidden territory. For most people, such barriers would redirect interest toward legal alternatives. But Michel wasn't most people. The forbidden nature of the caves transformed them from geological curiosities into personal challenges that seemed to call his name. On the evening of April 6th, Michel packed his gear with methodical precision. His backpack contained everything his research suggested was essential: a primary headlamp with backup batteries, secondary lighting systems, emergency food and water, first aid supplies, and a newly purchased caving helmet with reinforced protection and multiple light mounting points. Despite his thorough preparation, Michel made one fatal omission. He told no one his specific destination. While he mentioned to his mother that he planned a caving expedition, he provided no details about which cave he intended to explore or when she should expect his return. This decision, perhaps born from awareness that his planned activity was illegal, would soon become crucial in a race against time. The morning drive to Saspowska gave Michel opportunity to contemplate what lay ahead. Spring was asserting itself across the Polish countryside, and limestone formations became more prominent as he approached his destination. Cave entrances appeared like dark wounds in the cliff faces, watching his approach with ancient indifference. After parking near the park boundary, Michel shouldered his pack and began hiking toward his target. The approach required leaving established trails and pushing through dense vegetation across uneven terrain. Each step took him further from safety and deeper into wilderness, where help would be difficult to summon and harder to deliver. Saspowska Cave's entrance sat more than 65 feet above the valley floor, accessible only via a treacherous scramble up loose rock and thick undergrowth. The elevated position should have served as a warning. Caves positioned high on cliff faces often feature complex internal structures with limited escape routes. But anticipation drove Michel forward. The metal grate blocking the entrance represented a substantial barrier designed to deter casual intruders. However, barriers installed to stop tourists are often no match for someone with climbing experience and determination. Michel had anticipated this obstacle and came prepared with tools adapted from his mountaineering kit. Working with focused intensity, he managed to create an opening large enough to squeeze through. The metallic sounds of his work echoed off the cave walls, but no one was around to hear. He was alone with his ambition and his rapidly escalating commitment to an increasingly perilous plan. Slipping through the compromised barrier, Michel found himself in Saspowska Cave's entrance chamber. The space felt relatively spacious, about 8 feet wide and tall enough for him to stand upright. His headlamp beam revealed limestone walls polished smooth by ancient water flow and decorated with mineral deposits that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the artificial light. The cave extended approximately 230 feet into the mountain, but Michel could see only the first few dozen feet from his position. The chamber sloped downward at a gentle angle, and the passage clearly narrowed dramatically as it penetrated deeper into the bedrock. What remained hidden from his vantage point was just how severely the cave would restrict his movement as he ventured further from daylight. Michel paused momentarily, allowing his eyes to adjust to the underground environment. The silence was absolute, a complete absence of sound that felt both peaceful and unsettling. No wind, no distant traffic, no rustle of vegetation. Only his breathing and the soft scraping of equipment against stone. This moment might have been his last opportunity for rational reconsideration. Standing at the threshold between surface world and underground realm, Michel could have acknowledged that his lack of practical experience made solo exploration extremely dangerous. Instead, he checked his gear one final time and began his descent into the passage that would become his grave. As Michel progressed deeper into Saspowska Cave, the comfortable entrance chamber gave way to increasingly restrictive passages. What began as a walkable tunnel gradually became a crawlway, then a tight squeeze, and finally a space so constricted that forward movement required careful body positioning and controlled breathing. The psychological impact of such confinement defies easy description. Human minds aren't naturally adapted to function in spaces barely larger than human bodies. Each forward movement brought Michel into closer contact with cave walls until limestone pressed against him from multiple directions simultaneously. Darkness beyond his headlamp seemed to press inward like a living entity, and the mountain's weight became an almost tangible presence above him. For someone without cave experience, these sensations can trigger claustrophobia, panic attacks, or simply poor decision-making born from stress and disorientation. Michel's mountaineering background had taught him fear management and focus under pressure, but underground navigation required fundamentally different skills. The strategies that serve him well on vertical rock faces, aggressive movement, rapid problem-solving, quick retreat capability, were not only useless in tight cave confines, but potentially deadly. As the passage continued narrowing, Michel made a series of commitments that would prove impossible to reverse. Each squeeze through a tight section, each decision to push forward rather than turn back, took him deeper into a situation where retreat would become increasingly difficult. The cave was funneling him toward a point of no return, though he likely didn't recognize this reality until far too late. The section that experienced cavers had dubbed the clamp represented the most restrictive part of the entire cave system. This natural bottleneck, formed by specific limestone dissolution patterns over millions of years, created a passage barely wide enough for a human torso. Navigating it required techniques that combined controlled breathing, precise body positioning, and psychological composure, skills that came only from extensive underground experience. For Michel, approaching this section without practical cave knowledge was like attempting an advanced rock climb without ever touching a practice wall. His theoretical understanding simply couldn't substitute for the muscle memory and spatial awareness that develops only through hours spent in similar environments. The physics of what happened next are straightforward but terrifying. Michel apparently attempted to squeeze through the restriction by making his body as compact as possible, possibly turning sideways or even inverting to minimize his profile. This approach might have seemed logical based on mountaineering experience, where changing position often provides access to holds or passages unavailable in standard orientation. But caves aren't mountain faces, and techniques that work in vertical environments can prove lethal in horizontal ones. As Michel worked his way into the restriction, cave walls began gripping his body like a vice. What started as a tight fit became an inescapable trap as limestone pressed against him from multiple angles, preventing movement in any direction. The moment Michel realized he was trapped must have been one of pure terror. The gradual progression from movement to restriction to complete immobilization unfolded over time, minutes or perhaps hours, giving him ample opportunity to understand his deteriorating circumstances. Unlike sudden accidents that happen too quickly to process, Michel's entrapment was a slow-motion disaster that allowed him to experience every stage of his worsening situation. While Michel fought his losing battle against the limestone walls, the surface world continued its normal rhythm, unaware of the drama unfolding below. His mother went about her daily routine, perhaps occasionally wondering about her son's adventure, but not yet concerned about his absence. The sun set on April 7th and rose again on April 8th, marking time that transformed Michel's expedition from an overdue adventure into a missing person emergency. Michel's mother experienced the transformation from mild concern to absolute terror in ways only parents can understand. When her son failed to return as expected, her initial reaction was probably irritation rather than fear. Adventure sports often run over schedule, and experienced athletes sometimes become so absorbed in activities that they forget to check in with worried family members. But as hours stretched into a full day without contact, maternal instincts began sounding alarm bells that couldn't be ignored. Michel was responsible about communication, especially during potentially dangerous activities. His failure to respond to calls and messages was completely out of character and suggested something had gone seriously wrong. The decision to drive to Ojkow National Park represented every parent's worst nightmare, the moment when abstract worry transforms into need for concrete action. The drive must have been torture, filled with wild speculation about what she might find and desperate hope that her fears were unfounded. Finding Michel's car in the parking area was both relief and new terror. It confirmed he had reached his intended destination and hadn't been involved in a traffic accident. But it also meant whatever had happened occurred in the wilderness, where possibilities for disaster were numerous and survival chances often slim. Standing beside her son's empty vehicle as darkness fell on April 8th, Michel's mother faced the moment every adventure athlete's family dreads. Realizing a missing person case was about to become a search and rescue operation. Her decision to contact authorities at 12:45 a.m. set in motion events that would ultimately reveal the tragic truth about Michel's fate. Polish police response to Michel's disappearance was swift and professional, reflecting the serious nature of wilderness missing person cases. Officers arrived within hours and immediately began standard protocols, searching Michel's car for destination clues, interviewing his mother about his experience level and mental state, and coordinating with specialized rescue teams. Search dogs provided the first real breakthrough. These animals, trained to follow human-scent trails even in challenging environments, quickly picked up Michel's track from his car. The trail led away from the parking area into rough terrain, characterizing the park's cave-rich sections. However, the dogs lost the scent as quickly as they'd found it, suggesting Michel's path had led to a location where normal scent dispersal patterns were disrupted. such as a cave entrance. The Jurassic Group's involvement, a specialized mountain and cave rescue team, marked escalation from simple missing person case to technical rescue operation. These volunteers understood immediately that cave rescue would present challenges far beyond typical wilderness emergencies. Their arrival with 22 rescuers and additional search dogs reflected both the situation's seriousness and the resources required for success. Discovery of Michelle's trail leading to Saspowska cave entrance at 4:30 a.m. on April 9th filled the rescue team with both hope and dread. Hope, because they had finally located their target and could focus efforts on a specific location. Dread, because experienced cavers understood exactly how dangerous solo cave exploration could be, especially for someone without proper training. The cave entrance presented the rescue team with their first major challenge. The compromised Great Michel had bypassed was evidence of both his determination and his disregard for safety protocols. His willingness and ability to defeat a substantial barrier meant his commitment to illegal exploration had been absolute, and retreat had probably never been serious consideration. Inside the cave, discovery of Michelle's keys, backpack, and other personal items told a story experienced rescuers could read like a book. The progression of abandoned gear marked his path deeper into the system and suggested he'd been shedding equipment as passages became more restrictive. This is common in cave emergencies, as trapped explorers often attempt reducing their profile by removing anything that might prevent squeezing through tight restrictions. The cave environment the rescue team entered was a claustrophobic nightmare that tested even their extensive experience. Passages that had seemed challenging to Michel during initial exploration became nearly impossible to navigate for rescuers carrying additional equipment and operating under emergency stress. Limestone walls pressed inward from all directions, and darkness beyond their lights felt like a physical presence. As the team worked deeper into the cave, restrictions became so severe that only the smallest and most flexible members could continue forward. This represents one of cave rescue's cruel ironies. People best equipped to provide help are often too large to reach locations where help is most needed. Team members who could fit through the tightest passages weren't necessarily those with the most medical training or rescue experience. The description of the passage as being like trying to slip under a small car provides visceral understanding of just how restrictive the cave had become. For rescuers accustomed to challenging underground environments, this comparison indicated difficulty levels that pushed boundaries of human possibility. The fact that trained, experienced cavers struggled to make progress through these restrictions made clear that Michel, with no practical cave experience, had been attempting something far beyond his capabilities. When the rescue team reached Michel's location approximately 14 meters from the cave entrance, the operation transformed from rescue to recovery mission. Discovery of his feet, motionless and vulnerable in the narrow passage, told experienced rescuers everything they needed to know about the situation they faced. His positioning, almost completely inverted in the passage's most restrictive section, indicated Michel had died in exactly the kind of trap cave rescue experts most fear. The first rescuer to reach Michel at 8:20 a.m. had been working nearly 4 hours to cover less than 50 feet of cave passage. This glacial pace reflected not inefficiency, but incredible difficulty of moving through spaces barely larger than human bodies while carrying rescue equipment. When the rescuer called out to Michel and received no response, the silence carried weight that echoed through limestone passages and confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. Attempts to check for signs of life, pricking Michel's foot with a knife to test reflexes, grabbing his ankle to check for pulse, revealed the cruel reality. Michel's skin was cold, his muscles had begun stiffening with rigor mortis, and there was no heartbeat or other sign of life. The medical assessment cave rescue teams dread had become necessary, determining that rescue had become recovery. Realization that Michel had been dead for hours, probably since sometime on April 7th or early April 8th, added another layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking situation. while his mother had been growing worried, while police had been organizing search efforts, while the rescue team had been preparing equipment and planning their approach, Michel had already lost his battle against Saspowska Cave's limestone walls. The race against time had been lost before anyone realized it had begun. With Michel's death confirmed, the rescue team faced a challenge both technically complex and emotionally devastating. Extracting his body from a passage so narrow that reaching him alive had been nearly impossible. This operation pushed boundaries of what cave rescue techniques could accomplish and required levels of patience, precision, and physical endurance that tested every team member. The decision to use chisels to carefully widen the passage represented commitment to recovering Michel's body that went far beyond expectations. It would have been understandable for the rescue team to conclude that risks and difficulties involved in extraction were too great to justify, especially given that Michel was already dead. Instead, they chose to embark on a painstaking process requiring hours of careful work in the most challenging possible conditions. Chiseling limestone in narrow cave passage confines is difficult to imagine for those who haven't experienced such environments. Each chisel strike had to be carefully controlled to avoid damaging Michel's body or creating loose rock that could further complicate extraction. Work had to be done in shifts, with rescuers taking turns in the tight passage while others waited in slightly wider sections behind them. Extracting Michel's body, once the passage had been widened enough, required coordination and teamwork that reflected the rescue team's professionalism and dedication. Moving a human body through cave passages is challenging under the best circumstances. Doing so in passages barely wider than the body itself required techniques and equipment specifically developed for such nightmare scenarios. The work to free Michel from the clamp and navigate his body through the cave system to the surface took more than 10 hours, stretching from early morning discovery until 6:30 p.m. that evening. This marathon effort reflected not only technical challenges involved, but also the team's emotional commitment to ensuring Michel's family could have closure and his remains could be treated with dignity. Careful coordination required to move Michel's body through the narrow main tunnel was like a complex puzzle where every movement had to be planned and executed with precision. There was no room for error, no possibility of rushing, and no way to make cave passages larger than hours of careful chiseling had already accomplished. Each foot of progress toward the surface required multiple people working in perfect coordination, often in spaces so narrow that only one person could work at a time. Throughout this grueling process, Michel's mother waited at the surface, enduring a vigil no parent should ever experience. Knowledge that her son was dead, combined with uncertainty about when his body would be recovered and in what condition, created suffering both acute and prolonged. The professional rescue team working below understood the human dimension of their technical challenge and were motivated as much by compassion for Michel's family as by their own professional standards. When Michel's body finally emerged from Saspowska Cave as the sun was setting on April 9th, it marked the end of one of the most challenging cave recovery operations in Polish rescue history. The team had accomplished something many experts would have considered impossible, demonstrating levels of skill, determination, and teamwork that honored both their profession and the memory of the young man they had worked so hard to bring home. Medical realities of Michel's death reflect harsh physics of human physiology in extreme environments. Trapped inverted in a space barely larger than his body, Michel faced a combination of challenges that created a perfect storm of life-threatening conditions. Understanding these medical factors helps explain not only how he died, but why his death was probably inevitable once he became trapped in the clamp. Positional asphyxia occurs when body positioning interferes with normal breathing and circulation patterns. In Michel's inverted position, gravity worked against his cardiovascular system, forcing his heart to pump blood upward against gravitational pull. This extra workload would have been manageable for short periods, but as hours passed, the strain on his heart would have become increasingly difficult to sustain. Compression of his chest and lungs by cave walls and his own body weight further complicated his respiratory situation. Normal breathing requires chest cavity expansion to draw air into the lungs, but tight cave passage confines prevented this natural movement. Each breath became a struggle against mechanical constraints of his environment, and the effort required to breathe would have increased his oxygen consumption while simultaneously reducing his ability to obtain oxygen. Hypothermia added another layer of physiological stress to Michel's situation. Cave environments maintain constant temperatures typically much cooler than normal human body temperature. The combination of reduced muscle movement, compromised circulation, and direct contact with cold limestone surfaces would have caused his body temperature to drop steadily. As hypothermia progressed, his mental clarity would have deteriorated, making it even more difficult to problem solve or coordinate movements that might have improved his situation. The exact cause of Michel's death, whether primarily from positional asphyxia or hypothermia, will never be known with certainty. In reality, these conditions worked together in a downward spiral that made survival impossible once he became trapped. His mountaineering fitness and experience, which had served him so well in other dangerous environments, were simply irrelevant to the specific challenges he faced in Saspowska Cave's depths. Michel's death serves as a stark reminder of fundamental differences between various forms of adventure sports and the critical importance of proper training and experience. Skills that make someone an excellent mountaineer don't automatically translate to safe caving, just as being an expert cave explorer doesn't guarantee success on mountain faces. Each environment demands its own specific skill set, knowledge base, and safety protocols. The tragedy also highlights dangers of solo exploration in any high-risk environment. While experienced adventurers sometimes undertake solo expeditions safely, such activities require not only extensive experience, but also careful planning, proper communication protocols, and backup safety measures. Michel's decision to explore a restricted cave alone, without informing anyone of his specific location or expected return time, violated virtually every principle of safe adventure sports participation. Barriers that park authorities had installed at cave entrances weren't arbitrary bureaucratic obstacles, but practical safety measures born from experience with previous accidents and incidents. Access restrictions to Saspowska's caves reflected not only environmental protection concerns, but also recognition of genuine dangers these underground systems pose to unprepared explorers. Perhaps most importantly, Michel's story illustrates fatal consequences that can result from overconfidence and inadequate respect for unfamiliar environments. His months of theoretical study had given him knowledge about caving, but not wisdom about its practical challenges. The difference between these two forms of understanding proved literally a matter of life and death. Today, Saspowska Cave remains much as Michel found it, a narrow, dangerous passage that continues to challenge even experienced cavers. The limestone walls that trapped him show no signs of their role in this tragedy, and the underground environment continues its patient work of geological formation, indifferent to human concerns and ambitions. Rescue equipment and techniques used to recover Michel's body have been refined and improved, but fundamental challenges of cave rescue remain unchanged. The physics of moving human bodies through spaces barely larger than those bodies will always push limits of what rescue teams can accomplish. And there will always be situations where technical challenges exceed human capabilities. Michel's story has become part of the oral tradition of cave rescue teams and adventure sport communities, serving as a cautionary tale that helps others understand real risks involved in underground exploration. His death was not meaningless if it prevents others from making similar mistakes or encourages proper training and safety protocols among aspiring cavers. The forbidden caves of Saspowska National Park continue attracting attention from unauthorized explorers, despite barriers and warnings authorities have put in place. Michel's tragedy serves as a reminder that these restrictions exist for good reasons and that the underground world demands respect, preparation, and humility from those who would dare enter its domain. In the end, Michel's final adventure became a journey from which there was no return, a solo expedition into darkness that claimed his life and left his family forever changed. His story stands as both tribute to the human spirit of exploration and sobering reminder of the price that can be paid when that spirit isn't tempered with wisdom, experience, and respect for the awesome power of the natural world.